I have got three very special guests who I'll introduce in just a second. But I want to kick right off by talking about the title of this class, which is, it's about creating a foundation for growth and endurance. Why on earth do you want to create a foundation as a startup? It's the last thing you think about. You think about all these things that could make you nimble and agile and get you going, that would stop you from being constrained in any way. So I'm careful about the choice of words, but foundation is still a word that, despite many questions about what culture really means, I've stuck with. And here's why. We've used this framework in the past, and we've talked about how if you have a great idea, those of you who came to the class earlier in the semester, realize the importance of creating a value proposition as a starting point, something that really is clear and compelling to your potential audience, that gets them excited about what you could bring to them, what problem you could solve for them. That's a great starting point. We also talked about in the roadmap class how you want to get to a vision or mission, and we're going to spend some time on that in this class. But there's a massive, massive long gap between there. And let me get very specific about it. On average, it's about 7.8 years. Sounds very precise. It is. Turns out that's the average statistic for what it takes to build a company to get to exit today. And so you've got to think about, between your idea and what you're envisioning your company is going to become, what are you going to do for 7 or 8 years that is going to provide some consistency to your company? Because lots of things are going to change for sure. Probably your idea is going to evolve, so is the marketplace, and your ability to execute towards it better have something that gives you a consistency to hang on to. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about how do you create a cultural consistency that gives you a basis to build your company. So let me jump right in and say what we're not covering tonight. Because I've got three great guests to talk, we're not actually covering the Vision, Mission, and Culture workshop. That is on my site, and so you can just go to startupsecrets.com. And I think I kept it up here so you could just take a quick look at it. Those of you who haven't been there before, just go to Startup Secrets. You'll find every workshop is listed by just clicking here. And then we can walk you through to, for example, where we are now, company formation. And there are a couple of workshops, a couple of case studies, some stuff from Noam Wasserman, another of the HBS professors. If you haven't read his stuff, it's fantastic. Lots of examples from previous workshops. We had, for example, Acquia come through here. We had Salsify last year. So some examples of what is important about building this kind of framework out, and some of the things that will help you as a startup figure out how to go about doing your own vision, mission, and culture build-up. But let's just go back to basics for tonight and ask the obvious question. Why is this important? I've given you a sense of it, but I just want to get the audience engaged here for a second. So can anybody tell me what would be an example of something that is important based on vision, mission, and culture? Any of those things. So why would you have a vision? Why might you have a mission? What's important about a culture? I won't ask my special guests yet because they're going to weigh in turn. So anybody? Go ahead.
For the direction of the company.
Great. So direction, that's an extremely important one. That's that classic statement. If you don't know where you're going, then any road's going to get you there. So direction is extremely important. What else?
Would they say what kind of people join the company?
People, that's unbelievably important. Jonathan, can you say more about why that's related here?
Probably because you want the people who are working for your company, you want the vision of the company, the mission, and the culture to align across the board.
Fantastic. I don't think I need to give the class. This is going to be awesome. So let's just spend 1 second on this one because it's going to come up a lot tonight. There was a key word that Jonathan used, which is alignment. So I always put this in a very simple sense. A good vision, mission, culture focuses people. And if you don't have one, you're defocused by default. And you may end up in a much worse situation, which is actually literally divergent in terms of the energy that people are putting into things. That's a problem as a startup, because the one thing we all know about startups is that we have less resource than everybody else. That's basically the bottom line. So we want to use that resource very carefully. We want it aligned and focused and all pointed in the same direction. What else? Let's pick one more thing, maybe to do with, let's say, culture, for example. Go ahead.
Me?
Yep.
I think overall I think that your mission is what helps guide your vision, but the culture is what helps execute on that.
Fantastic. We got the exact word I wanted out here. What we're really trying to do is come up with a framework here so you have the right people to execute, they're aligned, and that There's one other word we didn't get out tonight. They're very empowered. And now let me introduce my guests who are here to bring it to life. So first of all, I have Paul English. Paul, just give everybody a wave so we know in what order we have here. Paul has been involved in the software industry for many, many years. Most recently, in terms of Boston at least, has set up Blade, which is a fantastic space that is dedicated to finding the best consumer startups, where he's investing in not just the classic things of putting a team together, but actually helping that team formulate their whole business model, strategy, and indeed product formation. So we're really delighted to have Paul here. He was previously the founder of Kayak, which many of you, I hope, will have used, and if you haven't, go give it a try, although I guess he's not a beneficiary of that anymore. And then for many years, I've been pleased to watch Mike Duffy in the middle. Mike, welcome. Build some of the best teams in the enterprise software business, and most recently just started a new company, Silent. But he's also going to share with us his experience of building a company called OpenPages that was acquired by IBM. And then last but not least, I'm really delighted to have Adam Malonis here, who's going to talk to us about a very different business, revolutionizing the food industry with Chew Labs. So these are our guests tonight, and my encouragement to you is take advantage of them. You are very lucky to have these three speakers here. I feel very privileged to be working with them. And it's all about what you want to get out of them tonight. So let's just get straight into this and focus on vision. How many of you use Twitter? Okay, good. Then you should be tweeting questions in. I'm going to ask the three of you guys. Do you have any idea what Twitter's mission is?
No. I could probably guess, but no. I don't
Come on, take a guess. You're a consumer guy.
sharing all the world's information. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds sort of Google-esque, could be Twitter-esque.
Yeah.
This is a problem that Twitter is having. So there are three great people here. You will use it, and yet we can't say what Twitter's vision and mission is. What do you think the result of that will be? Well, first of all, I'll tell you, they do have one. And Paul's not far off it, actually. Is give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. So I kind of like that, actually. It's kind of a fun vision. The bad news is that they didn't have that vision when they started. And they did go through, I won't bother I shouldn't say bother. I'll be careful not to share all the dirty laundry that I know. But I know there were a lot of challenges internally because people didn't necessarily understand, even internally, let alone externally, what their vision and mission was and what they were going to do. Now, that's not a bad thing. It's often how ideas or opportunities arise. They basically figured out, actually, after a failed venture, that there was a really simple way for people to tweet, as we now call it, but to communicate with the equivalent of an SMS. I don't think, like anybody at that time, they probably had any idea of where it might go. But like I said to you, at this point, for a public company, if we don't know what their vision is, it's a problem. This is the headline from just a few weeks ago. And Wall Street is really struggling with Twitter. Their stock prices dropped dramatically. Their CEO has been held up to articulate that vision so people can understand how to get behind it. So this is not stuff that has just like day-to-day nicety associated with it. This really makes a big difference. So what we do in the major workshop is we talk about why, and I encourage you to look at, for a startup, 3 things in particular that are important. And let's start with the first 2, which I'm going to put on the board here. So the first is, how will the market evolve? Because you do know one thing when you start up, and that is that the world's going to change. That's about all you know. And so if you're going to be effective at continuing to lead a marketplace, you better have a vision for it. And at this point, to bring that to life, what I'd like to do is just ask each of my guests about their marketplace. And you don't need to tell me your vision at this stage. Just tell me a little bit about your marketplace as you experienced it. So let's actually start with you, Adam. Completely different market.
I think I'm probably the easiest one. In food, obviously the world is changing very rapidly. You've just got to watch industries like the cigarette industry. The class action suit lawyers went from cigarettes and now they're moving into food and they're attacking all the big food companies. Right now, every big food and beverage company in the world knows it's adapt or die. Right? So for me, it's very simple. It's evolving every single day. We're trying to not only ride that wave, we're trying to lead that particular change across multiple sectors.
So the food market is changing, which gives you opportunity. you've got a vision for how you'll lead it. You're going to share that with us later. Very good. Mike, what about you?
Well, security is a big problem for companies. Hackers have the advantage. Over the last year, my partner and I have met with hundreds of executives and companies, and generally, all companies now expect that their companies are infected and that hackers have the advantage. The way hackers get into companies is through what's called the endpoint, which is our laptop computers or the tablets and phones we carry. Today, it's primarily the laptops because it's still so easy for the hackers to get in. And Microsoft technologies are the predominant way they get in because Microsoft still owns over 90% of the desktops. The security technology that is provided to the marketplace is primarily focused on the world's largest companies, the Fortune 1000. So the Fortune 1000 can afford to have hundreds of security guys and men and women that focus on this big problem. And the industry supplies them with really complex technologies and advanced stuff to try to help solve this problem. So underneath the Fortune 1000, companies are really exposed. And virus management used to be able to stop this stuff, but the hackers figured out a couple of years ago through something called polymorphism how to kind of reconfigure their attack on the fly. And so virus management doesn't work anymore. So what we're going to do, or do you want to talk about that? Or?
Go ahead, I don't want to stop you.
So what we're going to do is we're bringing to market advanced, very powerful security for all companies. And it's going to be really easy to use so that you don't need to have hundreds of security folks to manage it. And it's going to be priced really affordably. Fast, affordable, simple, powerful security.
Awesome. I feel like I'm ready to write my check. But this is the point, by the way. What you've got Mike doing here is telling his story, and he's doing it in a way where he's painting the picture about the marketplace first. So we're understanding initially this problem, which is obviously viruses, as they used to exist, were easily stopped, but now they're not. Oh, and by the way, this market is typically dominated by solutions for big companies. And what about the rest of us? So anyway, you get the point here. There's some storytelling that goes into the vision and mission piece. And Mike also jumped onto the next piece, which is starting to talk about how he will lead it. I'll let him fill that in later when he's got his own slides. But I want to just give Paul a chance to talk because he's got a very much broader application that he can tell. You can probably all relate to when you think about travel. So tell me a little bit about what was the market as you were thinking about it when you came up with the idea for Kayak, and what was the vision you were starting to evolve?
So I've worked in software for many years, and most software, as it gets old, gets slow because I think some programmers write code because they can, as opposed to trying to focus on what the customer is actually building. And so software over time gets more complicated and gets slow. And I would say that was certainly true of the travel industry. The guys leading the space, Expedia, Travelocity, Orbitz, and even Priceline, their software just became, I would say, bloated and ugly, and there's too much stuff going on. And they also didn't have all the content that users wanted. And so when we entered the market, or created the company in 2004, I looked at a market where all the software was bloatware. It was slow, and it had a lot of things going on the screen. It was kind of distracting, and it didn't have the fares that I wanted. And then worse, once you saw a fare that you would want for a flight or for a hotel, those search sites would try to get you to buy directly on that site. So Expedia would only show you things that you could buy on Expedia. They wouldn't let you go directly to the hotel. They would hide the phone number of the hotel. They wouldn't give a direct link to it. And so we just saw a weak underbelly in the market, and we thought there was an opportunity to build something which was simple, much, much faster than anyone has done before, and had full information.
So does everybody understand where Paul is coming from? He's got a pretty clear statement of what he felt was wrong with the travel market there and what he could do to disrupt it with Kayak. How many of you, again, have used Kayak, just to get a show of hands? Great. Awesome. OK. So now, because you've used Kayak, I want to get you all thinking about this. What do you think Kayak's vision statement would have been? We're going to give it in a second, but any of you who've used it? put yourself in Paul's situation. He's talked to you about this marketplace. He's described it as bloatware, described all the problems, the lack of content and other things. You're now ready to be Paul. Go ahead.
I would say that it'd have to do something with having all the information necessary to make the purchase readily available, whether it be price, different options, things like that.
Okay. Anybody else? There's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just curious. How do you think?
The simplest way to find the cheapest one.
Oh, I like that. Simplest way. Paul is not allowed to comment. He's not allowed to smile or give any hints here. Simplest.
Hiram.
Okay. To travel. Who else? Go ahead.
Making travel planning simple.
Travel planning simple. I like the word simple keeps coming up. So what else might we say?
I'd say that it also it provides less bias because you can compare many different airlines and hotels and such, different vendors.
Compare with less bias. Okay, I like that too. I'm going to give Paul a chance to talk about all your ideas in just a second. So we've stumbled into it, so I'll just go straight there. Vision and mission often do get confused. It doesn't matter if you end up creating one and the same. Some companies have their vision statement very much, melded with their mission statement. All I want you to avoid is this. And I borrowed from Marketoonist, so go take a look. They've got great cartoons up there. People sit down and create mission statements almost like they're templates. We want a relentless focus on quality because we've got to sound like we're doing the right things, and our customers are important, so we'll strive to look after. That is a meaningless, mindless thing to do. But let's just pause and say why. What's important about your mission statement? If you could fill in a template and get one, and you're done, obviously life would be easy, right? What is important about it? You're trying to hire great people. You're trying to inspire them to do great things.
What should separate you from the pack?
Yeah, it better be something that's differentiating. If everybody could do it and everybody says, oh, well, I could fill in this template, how are you going to be differentiated? How are you going to stand out? How are you going to be the person that people aspire to come and work for? This is important stuff. Now, I was going to show a video of it, but just because I want to keep focus on our team, I'll put it up on my site. I actually went to one of my companies. Actually, Evan is here from Acquia. So just 2 days ago, they started their vision, mission, goals exercise, which is an annual exercise for them to update it. And the whole exec team, in their case, that's about 35 people now because it's a big company, gets together to review this. And the point about that exercise is not that they come out with a mission statement. It's that everybody is involved in building that statement from the heart. So it's a genuine statement of intent that cohesively binds that group of people toward what they're going to try to do. Year by year, they adopt it, and obviously, year by year, they try to evolve it. So please avoid doing this. Please do spend time, I'll put the example up on the site, trying to build your mission statement from the heart so that it's authentic to you and that it does mean something to you, because the rest of it is a waste of time. So Harvard's got a great way of putting this together. And those of you who want to go look at this again, there's a great iLab video on it, actually also for not-for-profit. They have the 4 M's as they talk about it. They look for mission statements that are memorable, manageable, measurable, and motivational, which I think is a great way of thinking about this. So that's the framework. Now let's give Paul a chance to tell us, how did it come about?
So I would actually say this was a mission for us, not really a vision statement.
Very good.
We never had an explicit vision statement. The things we were explicit about were our values. One of the things that I frequently counsel entrepreneurs as the very first thing they do, even before they look at the market, is to have the founders be really explicit about what their values are, what type of teams they like working on, how they like those teams to work, and really creating a foundation where you're launching from an integrity of what the founders are actually like. And I've counseled entrepreneurs in creating this foundation, this value statement, or statements. Don't say the things that your investors want to hear. Just say what you're actually like. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you can state, these are our values, here's how we actually think, and you communicate that clearly, then you have nothing to apologize for, and everyone understands how decisions are made at your company. So to me, even before there's a vision for a market, there's a founder identity that starts with the company that you want to build. And so we had we were always trying to be pretty transparent about that stuff. And then as far as vision, a lot of it was just our view of the market. Some of the things I alluded to earlier, what's good about the market, what don't we like about the market, where we think the market is going. And then we clearly stated our mission, which is up on the screen here, something very simple. Another way we would describe this mission is we built the travel site that we wanted to use. We also sometimes would say, if someone found a fare on another website that didn't exist on Kayak, we failed them. So there should never be a reason. You know, we used to say we can't stop people from using other travel sites, but we can stop them from getting an advantage using other travel site. And that was an aspiration of ours from day one. There'll never be a fare on another website that we don't have. It's quite hard to do, but that was one of our aspirations in the very beginning.
So what I love about this is, I mean, it doesn't take long for, if you're not feeling it, I'm certainly feeling it here, for anybody listening to Paul to start feeling like, wow, that's compelling, right? You feel like you can instantly say, well, we could see how this site would make a difference to our lives if we're trying to plan something. You know, never finding, for example, a fare that's, you know, we can't get a quote from on Kayak. Finding it in such a simple way. So a lot of the things that people suggested, Paul, I'd love you to just give your judgment here as to what was coming up from the audience. Did they come up? Are these things, you know, is the audience thinking about it correctly?
I love these. I mean, I love the phrase simple, cheapest way to find travel planning simple. You know, we were a little bit more explicit about that, but I think compared with Less Bias, I like all of these. I think that these are all the travel information in one place. I forget the exact quote, that first one, but I think these all are working around our identity.
Great. So the good news is you've obviously seen Kayak and you all interpreted it right. And so Paul did his job because he translated vision through his execution into a site without you knowing what his vision statement was that you actually already identified with. That's the power of a good vision statement. Even though you didn't know that was his vision statement, you found that experience from his product. That, by the way, is the measure of a great vision, is that the customers are experiencing what you set out to give them. There's true fidelity between your intent and what the customers experience. So that's my measure, by the way, for a good vision and mission. Doesn't matter what you say, go out and talk to your customers, you know, month one, year one, and as many years thereafter, and ask them, so what do you think our company represents to you? Ask them, what do you think we're enabling you to do? Ask them, what do you think the values are that you experience when you're dealing with our company? And if they tell you A, B, and C, and you thought you were trying to do X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C is your vision and mission, no matter what you say, because the customer's view of you is the only thing that really matters. So that's the test I'd encourage you to apply. It's also really important that you as a founder are honest with yourself, that no matter how much you preach, the important thing is to listen and understand that. So thank you for sharing the Kayak experience. I now want to just share a great quote from one of our other founders, and that's John Hirschtick, who founded a company called SolidWorks, and now has gone on to do another company called Onshape. SolidWorks is a multi-billion-dollar outcome, and we think Onshape will be too. And that is, try to keep a very distinct eye out for hallucination, because you don't want a vision that is so enormous that it feels like it's boiling the ocean, nobody can relate to it, and they have no idea how to, for example, engage you. And so I have a very acid test for this. What would be the action you'd most like to have happen from somebody reading your vision or your mission? And they want to engage with you, and you're trying to build, obviously, a company. What would be the most fantastic thing that could happen? They read your vision and mission, and it was actionable. What would the action be that you'd want them to take?
Buy.
Who said that? Yeah, damn right.
Right.
The first thing we want a customer to do is wow, that's so compelling. Where can I get some of that?
Right.
I want to buy it. So the simple thing that separates vision from hallucination is 2 letters, P-O. A great vision and mission ultimately should be so actionable that somebody says, I want to travel by going through Kayak. I want to eat, choose food. I want to secure my company through Silent. That's what you want. And honestly, it's the difference between most startups that get traction and those that don't, is that it's obvious to people why they need this. That's also a part of, by the way, why we talk about value proposition first, because if you don't know what your value proposition, you can't come up with your vision and mission. It needs to be encapsulated, and they need to be closely related. So if your value proposition is enabling people to travel really simply, then your vision and mission can obviously be stated around that the way Kayak did and the way Paul did. Okay, so we talked a lot about how you travel between those two, and we talked a little bit about this in the workshop session with Paula from Equalogic. And for those of you who weren't here, I'm just going to share with you why Paula feels that culture is also an important part of this. So this is Paula in her words for those of you who weren't at the workshop. Talk to us about the importance of culture. Is it on a scale of 1 to 10, where does it rate compared to things like product and go-to-market?
So it's in the top 5. It's probably the top 1, because if you don't have the right culture, you won't have a good go-to-market, you won't have a customer focus. So everybody in Equalogic could be called up at 3 o'clock in the morning if a customer had a question or an issue, myself included. If you weren't that committed to customers, if you weren't going to give up your weekend to answer a question, even if it wasn't with our product, you really didn't belong there. So it was a totally customer-driven, customer-focused. Also, the life is too short. I said I want to live in a sitcom, not a drama. So if we've got a bunch of drama people or somebody who's got to be right, or the louder and faster you talk doesn't mean you're right? Just get rid of those people. It sounds terrible, sounds heartless. They'll be happier in a culture where that fits. You'll be happier in a culture where that's not there.
Pretty clear stuff. And by the way, there's a lot more of that interview. It's all available online. If you want to hear about why did she think that, what is the difference it made, et cetera. So this is why culture is something that we want to spend some time on now. So I started out with a very simple descriptor to add to culture, which is consistency. And I told you why I thought that was important. But what I want to do now is kind of relate it to you in very simple terms, because people always have a hard time understanding, so what is culture? How do you codify culture? How do you make it something that actually is actionable or workable, or something that is an executional framework? So for the first couple of years that I did this, a lot of programmers were in the audience, a lot of product developers, et cetera, and they helped me come up with this. For the techies among you, it's basically the operating system to run your apps on. And the reason I feel it's a great analogy, and I really encourage them to sort of help me frame it this way, is that if you have an operating system that's constantly changing, as you know, your apps usually break. And if things aren't kept consistent for you to run your software on, you end up with all sorts of problems. And so think about your culture as the platform to empower your people. That's really what it's all about. Now, let's get into it a little bit with our experts here today. So for you guys, what does culture mean? What are some of the things that you think are important in the operating system for your company going forward? And again, let's just start with you, Adam.
Well, look, it's culture is it's the old cliche, right? Everyone always says if you're talking about culture, there's a problem. So let me give you an example of what culture isn't. I've had several companies before, and with some of those, we've hired captains of industries. We've gone out and we've tried to hire the best possible talent, and I'll liken it to the football team Real Madrid. That's my favorite team. But the problem is they go out and they get superstars from every possible best team. They put the superstars together. But the problem is there's no glue between these players. So they all play individually, but they can never play as a team. In my past, I've mistaken that for building a great company, hiring great people. And unfortunately, most of those ended in tears. So a culture is something that you have to work at every single day. It's something that you can't talk about every day, otherwise it's the opposite of having a culture. And that's basically it.
I love this. So it's something you work at, but you can't talk about?
Not forbidden to talk about, because then that becomes a different kind of culture.
But I think you're making a key point here, which is you have to walk the talk, not talk the walk.
Exactly.
Right? And that's a very important part of what I hope you'll get out of tonight. Culture is not something you put up on the wall. Culture is something you live. And if you don't live it, and you don't exemplify it, it never happens. And so one of the things we're going to talk about here that you're bringing out is how that manifests itself. So you just gave a great example here. It's glue. It's something that helps the team. And I've experienced this many times before. Just hiring raw talent, if they're not aligned, as we talked about earlier, actually took that off, but this one of the first things that came up here, I think Jonathan brought it up, is going to leave people running around on different bases, as opposed to getting them to be effectively working together. So that's a great starting point.
Actually, one other thing is that people often think that you need to worry about culture as you get bigger. I say you've got to worry about it when you're small. When you're more than one person, even when you're one person, you've got to have your own set of standards. And when there's a second person, third, fourth, fifth, it has to start somewhere, and it has to start in the beginning. Because if you think that will come later when you're not so busy, it never happens.
How many of you are within a startup of the first 10 people here? Lots of you. Okay. Could one of you share with me, or with us, an example of where you're already experiencing it to be important to you to have a culture? And maybe you can share what the culture is. Yep.
For my startup, I want to have a culture where everyone's go-getters, like they enter in and they're aggressive right from the start. They learn as much about what we're trying to do as we can. I had this biz dev person who came in and didn't even read any of the materials we kept trying to give her. And she wasn't really a team player. She kept saying, I'm going to do this. And so we had to let her go within about 3 weeks.
So that's a fantastic example. So did she have all the right skills?
For sales, sure she did, but she didn't even know what she was selling.
So this is what often happens, by the way, and you're hearing it. What's your name, by the way? Jay. Thank you, Jay. It's a great example. So, you hire somebody, they've got all the right skills potentially for sales, but they don't have the right attributes which you need for a startup. They weren't a go-getter or they weren't a team player. Well, where do you express that? You express it in your culture. And this is exactly what Adam's saying. So if you know that's what you want, to Adam's point, why wouldn't you set that out from day one when you're the very first person on the team and you want the next person? Why wouldn't you set out all those attributes of what you're looking for and express them in your culture? Is that what you were getting at?
That's exactly it.
Now, Jay, back to you for a second. We're just getting into this, but what would be one of the values that you would pull out from these couple of ideas that you've got here for a cultural statement for your company?
That everyone needs to work together towards the common goal of, in my company, trying to get my product to people because it will save lives and not necessarily make money. And all she cared about was getting to a market that was going to make a ton of money.
Wow, you said a lot of great things there, by the way. So I'm going to just pull out a few because, first of all, and I know nobody can read this at the back, but you can hear me say it. Working together, teamwork, however you want to express it, is definitely something that you can codify in a culture. And how you do that, it becomes something I'm going to bring back to our experts in a second. But then you said something which was, I thought, really interesting. You started to define something about the purpose of your company. So I don't think about your company, but you said that it helps people save lives. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the product is a low-cost respirator for polluted environments. And I want to bring it to places like India and Bangladesh that have horrible pollution but can't afford it. And this co-founder was only interested in bringing it to China, which already has a huge market, and wanted to upcharge it a lot, and didn't care at all about the other countries that are suffering from pollution.
So can anybody just help Jay out for a second? What do you think is great about Jay's story? There's some purpose here, right? So what might be in his mission statement? I've heard low cost. Those are obvious things you might say. But what's he really trying to do here? What might you want to put in his mission statement with him? Save lives. Yeah, I mean, we said it earlier. That's anything that says, as something as meaningful and purposeful as, we can help people save lives by bringing them a lower cost respirator in a way that they couldn't have got access to before. That's a meaningful, measurable mission statement, right? To use some of those 4 M's that I was talking about earlier. So you can see how when you start to ask people these things, and you've got a clear mission, and you say, look, our mission is to save lives, and we have a value, which is we want team players, that before he made that hire now of that salesperson, he could have checked in and said, are you really aligned with this? Are you really a go-getter? Do you want to save lives? And instead of finding it out 4 weeks after he hired the person and having to let them go, which is very expensive in a startup, you lose a lot of time and money doing that, you could have avoided it up front. So now you're beginning to see why this stuff is so important, to Adam's point, really early on. Okay, thank you very much. Let's just keep going for a second. So Mike, we started to get the sense here of why this is important from a hiring perspective. Can you give us a sense about how you've used your culture from a hiring perspective?
So at OpenPages starting out, literally within my first 3 or 4 weeks there, we defined our values. And this was before we realized we had a big market problem. And by doing that, by defining our values up front, we did that with the whole team. And I'll tell you folks, 10 years later, they were the same values. And the team changed a lot over that time. But by doing that, and then driving into everything you do with those values, it helps you, it provides like a set of guidelines for everybody in terms of how we do things as a team, right? How we make decisions, what things are important to us, how do we treat each other, right? And what it does is it enables everybody to start to make decisions the company's way instead of waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do. And none of us, especially great people that are great leaders, the last thing you want to do is be expecting people to wait for you to tell them what to do. Today, you can't build a valuable company that way. So for hiring, we would actually drive into, we even drove into the questions we would ask of candidates. We would ask questions to try to figure out if they'd fit into our values or not. And we got better and better at it over the years. And we still made hiring mistakes, but far less than we would have if we didn't drive it in. And there's lots of other things we did with the values, and perhaps we'll get to that later.
Well, you just made the perfect connection that I think is what we were exploring here. And that is, how can you go out and hire people if you haven't expressed your values? You really can't, because you don't know how these people are going to behave, and you can't expect them to know if you haven't told them what you're looking for. So these two are utterly critically linked. And I know, Paul, you're quite passionate about this too. So tell us a little bit about how you think about hiring. I know you've written about it too.
At a very high level, there's two things I look for out of people when I hire them. One is just having a track record of success and bandwidth. They're fast, they can get stuff done, they've gotten stuff done. And the second one is that they have to be an energy amplifier. They have to make teams stronger. And I used to have this thing at Kayak that I would call the hallway test. And the way that it worked, we had one open office environment, but let's say I had a QA engineer who was working at her computer, and let's say she was awesome, she's been with us for a while, and a new product manager walks down the hall. Does she glance up towards him? Does she not notice him? Or does she divert her eyes away from him, thinking like, oh shit, if I make eye contact, I'm about to lose 10 minutes of my life. She's gonna talk about, whatever, that sometimes people talk a little bit too long. And I would say that if she didn't notice him walk by, he was energy neutral. If she was drawn towards him, he's probably an energy amplifier. Some of the people like engaging, they make themselves more efficient, they make themselves more productive. And if she diverted her eyes away from him, I would say it's probably because he was energy negative. And a lot of companies had the no assholes rule. Unfortunately, they didn't all follow that rule, but at Kayak, we had the no neutrals rule, which is really harsh. And what it means is, if you think about an open office environment, wherever someone is working, there are 4 people that sit around them. And every one of those people need to make you stronger. And if there's someone who's sitting next to you, and they're not engaging you and challenging you and making you stronger, as a manager, I just lost 25% of my ability to make you more energized and more productive. And so we would look for people who are energy amplifiers and who liked engaging and liked pushing other people and liked making the team stronger.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, now you're starting to get a sense. Do you have a feeling that Paul built a culture? There was the real intent about what he was doing, what he was looking for? Lots of nodding heads. Now you can tell what it is that is the measure for joining that company. You're expected to be somebody who can engage and make an amplification of people around you. That's a really great measure. So why wouldn't you state that? Then you're going to attract those kinds of people. It's going to be very obvious to people who don't want to engage that way that they're not a fit. And I love the fact that the way Paul's describing it, you can even physically see it. I think that's just awesome. Every one of these guys is trying to share with you something that's very authentic to them. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. What Paul just shared is from the heart there. What Mike was just sharing about his experience, by the way, of turning a company around, which was something I witnessed. So believe me, it's easy for him to skip over that. But it was a major turnaround where basically the entire value prop in the marketplace that he was in was disrupted. He still managed to keep his values and get a team motivated by giving them the empowerment that we were talking about earlier, with his culture and his values that made it possible for them to go off and make decisions and be effective in their own right. And that's why he got that turnaround done. So culture has a huge impact, and I think we've just covered the key point I wanted to make sure, which is for hiring, particularly when every startup that I talk with says their number one problem is what? Hiring. Then in which case, if you're going to try to stand out from the crowd, spend some attention and time on thinking about how your values, vision, mission, and culture will differentiate you and cause people to say, yeah, I really want to work there. That's exactly what we're hearing tonight. Okay, so just to summarize this piece, what is it? Well, it's multifaceted. Culture is how you do business. So as much as we all talk about what we do in business, that's the obvious thing that, you know, the product we sell or the service we deliver. But how you do business is just as important. And in fact, that's what I encourage you to spend time on. So it can be the personality of the company, the style of the company. You know, are you go-getters? You should try and find a way as an entrepreneur to express it as your heart and soul. Literally something that for you is so core to you. We often talk about it as DNA, for example, in some of our companies, that it is your real DNA, that it's what your makeup is. And you've heard people talk about it. I mean, I think it was Adam who said it earlier on. You can't just talk about it all day long. A lot of it's, you know, subconscious. It's stuff that you actually, once you've given people a sense of what the culture, you know, you give them a sense of how they can actually enact it, and then you obviously have to live it. So the trouble with all this is it's what I call the soft, hard stuff. It's very hard to codify this. So I'm going to try to get our experts up here to help you a little bit and engage at least a piece of the framework from one of our classes. So first of all, you're hearing about what some of this is, which is shared values. And they're things like beliefs or guiding principles. You've also heard from them how it's about living this, it's about modeling this. But now I want to start to get towards what it's like to actually execute on this. And I'm going to again start with Paul in this case and have him share with you what are the values you ended up drawing out at Kayak, and indeed what are they at Blade, how are they different, what was it that led to them?
So at Kayak, you know, every day there's three things I would think about in terms of how I spent my time. So I was team first, customer second, and then business results third. On business results, the one that I really cared about was revenue per employee because it showed efficiency. I will say that when I remember at the time of our IPO, our revenue per employee was not only higher than anyone in the travel industry, it's actually higher than Google and Facebook. We had about $1.5 million per employee, which to me showed that we built a culture where people were efficient and empowered. On the team first, I made a promise to people when they joined Kayak that 20 years from now, when they look back, it'll be the most fun they ever had working. And I really took that quite seriously. And I would constantly be debugging little defects in the culture. And when I would see things, interactions that didn't feel right, I would call people aside and just say, you know, what happened there? How could we have done that different? And I really thought that my job was recruiting the best possible people I can as individual performers and team members, and then coaching them to help make each other really productive. My belief was if I was successful at recruiting and coaching, everything else would just take care of itself. Now, I say customer second. We were pretty intensive with our customers. I'm going to talk a little bit. I have a couple stories about that we'll talk about later. But I thought that first you had to recruit and lead that team. And if you have this amazing team, then it's like, okay, what are we here to do today? And it's focused on customers. So that was the three clear things that I focus on at Kayak every day.
Let me just pause you there because there's so much rich stuff you shared that I want to ask the class for a second. So here's a question for everybody here. Why do you think Paul chose team first rather than customer first? You hear an awful lot of cultures that say, you know, the customer comes first. I'm not going to give you his answer. He'll tell you in a second. But why do you think that might be an appropriate thing? And do any of you disagree with it? For example, would your culture be the other way around?
I think he said team first specifically because he already had a set of values that he knew he was looking for, and so he knew if he built the best team to go for that problem, then they'd be able to actually make the customers happy, and then he could handle the customers after.
Sounds like a great explanation to me. Is that why you did it that way around?
Well, let me think of another way to explain this. And maybe this one isn't that great a rationale, but when I would go and work in the morning, I would want to have fun. Like I'd want to enjoy my work and my team. Someone once asked me many years ago, so Blade is my 5th company. I've started, Kayak's my fourth, but many years ago when I had started a company, someone asked me why I left my prior job and started my own company. I remember the time my daughter had just begun school, I think as a first grader. And my first reaction was, you know, Nicole's in school, I need something fun to do because she's not at home to hang out. And to me, work really has to be fun for me. Maybe it's not a very visionary, strategic way to think. Maybe it's kind of tactical or selfish, but it's what I think about first, is I want to have an incredibly fun team. So maybe it's not strategic, it's just how I actually operate. So that was the realistic reason why I always said team first. And my belief, again, is you get the right team and they get energized, they will build the best products in the industry if the team is just a little bit stronger than the competitors, if they're a little bit more energized.
So I'm going to bridge between the two of you. I mean, I think what you said is authentic to you, and what Paul said is authentic to him, which brings out an important point about culture. There's no right or wrong in culture. It's got to be what you believe in. So I'll tell you, actually, in one of my cultures, I used to say the first thing I want everybody to ask in an interview, those of you who've been in my class before have heard this, so forgive me repeating it, is what are you passionate about? I don't want to know where you came from or how many credits you got on your SAT or whatever it was. I wanted to know, what are you passionate about? Because to bridge the two comments we're getting here, my experience is when people are passionate about what they do, they tend to take pride in their work, and the results and the rewards all follow from that. If people aren't interested in what they're doing or they're not having fun at work, you are not going to get the best out of them, no matter what you say. Paul, you then jumped on to talk about something else I don't want to lose here. Culture is also measurable. You gave a great example of it. This measure, by the way, revenue per employee, is used in pretty much every single public company analysis. So lest you think culture's soft, no, it's actually hard. It has an impact on the bottom line and the top line. Thank you. You want to say a little bit about Blade?
Yeah, so for Blade, the 4 bullets I have here, internal, we call it Blade Code. I created this list with my co-founder, Bill O'Donnell, who's my CTO, and we just sat around one day and said, how do we want to treat each other, and what should we think about every day? In terms of if we hire a new employee, how do we orient them towards the culture we're trying to build? And the 4 things we came up with was have fun, get results, output matters, be kind and honest, and then be efficient. And I think this last part was added by Bill. Be efficient in person, in email, and in code. He and I both really value efficiency a lot. But those are the 4 things in terms of how we thought team members should interact with each other and how they should think about their work on a day-to-day basis.
And so how does that manifest itself in your results? I know it's early days for you in Blade, but how much you measure that when you go forward?
One of the ways that, so Blade, again, is a tech foundry. We co-found a few companies a year, and they live with us. We assign them people from our core team of 8, and we also help them hire their people. At the right point, we'll help them raise a Series A. We also will invest, but then we help them raise a Series A and kind of kick them out. One of the ways 10 years from now that I will look back and see if we've been successful or not is the venture capital guys who invest in our companies. When they meet our founding teams that we hand over to them, I want them to say it was the best founding team they met, in months. So I want to be known for the teams that we produce. And obviously there's return for our investors, but I think more than that, I want to be known for the teams that we produce.
Well, here's to that happening.
So the question is, how did you think about how early you wanted to, start putting in place that differentiating culture? And is it worth waiting a year or 6 months before trying different style of cultures that may differentiate yourself from other startups in the same space?
So as I was saying before, I think before you define a culture, the first thing is the founders need to declare their personal values, even before you talk about values of the company. And to me, it's an integrity issue about just being very transparent. This is actually how I think. I'm not spinning for my investors. I'm not spinning for my employees. Just to be really clear to you, this is how I'm wired and how I think. And I think it starts there from the founder statement. Another thing that you need to do as far as evolving the culture, you said that should you wait and let the team define the culture. I think in some ways, if you do cultural turnarounds, and I've done that myself, one of my companies was acquired by Intuit, and I was put kind of in charge by Scott Cook of changing the culture of the team in California. And I think the most effective way to do that as a team leader is be really selective with a key few hires and a key few terminations. Because I think Terminating people's employment is it's the worst thing a manager has to do. But if you want to turn a culture quickly, and there's someone who's really, really energy neutral, and people just can't stand working with them, and you've coached them and it can't change, getting rid of them will lift the culture a little bit, and then being really selective about who you promote and who you hire. Those people, the people are the representation and the creators of the culture. And so I think you can specify what your culture wants to be, but at the end of the day, it's the people walking around in the office that execute the culture. So a lot of our job as leaders is simply define our values and have the right team in place that can build this cohesive identity.
So did that answer your question? Because I felt that was a great question.
I would actually, I think your question was more, though, at the early stage, should you wait to define your values after you understand your product fit a little bit better, your business vision a little bit better? Is that what your question is?
Right. Yeah, and especially when the culture is going to differentiate yourself from the competition.
Yeah, so I would say no. All right, I don't think you need to wait. I think, to Paul's point, the founders should be very clear about what motivates them and the kind of work environment they want, and the kind of company they want to create, and the way the company will click, right, and execute, and do things that are important, right? And that's separate from the product you're going to build or the service you're going to build and the value you bring to the marketplace. It's really more about defining who you will be as a team and the way you'll treat each other and the way you'll treat your customers and what's important. Like Paul said, having fun. Is having fun important? Yeah, write it down,
My point on that actually is the longer you wait, you run the risk of actually trying to craft your mission and vision according to how you think your customers want you to behave or who your customers want you to be. So the earlier you do it when you don't have any customers, when you've only got a very small team, it helps you get to the real core of the values without all of that noise and distraction of marketing and how are you going to perform in market. It's just about the team.
You are all unbelievably good straight people for what I was about to say, which is don't wait, because you as a company can't be defined by other people. You have to be defined by yourself. Culture comes from the top. You as the founder are the person who's going to model the culture. So if you don't know what your values are, you are really going to confuse your team. And if you're not clear about what you're looking for when you're hiring people from the get-go, that's going to lead to a mishmash of a culture. And what we were talking about earlier is so critical. I've just sort of reused that technical notion. If you have a completely disparate set of things as your values that just don't thread together, it's like having an operating system that just doesn't run smoothly, that people can't plug into. So you want to define this as early as possible. And the other thing I said was really important is consistency. Culture is valued by consistency. If one day I hire somebody and they have a completely different set of values than the next day, everybody's going to wonder, well, so what do we hire for here? Do we hire for people who are really customer-oriented, or do we hire for people who are just monetarily driven? You've got to be really consistent about that from day one. And so I want to go back to, first of all, to clarify what I think you've heard from all three of them, and I would underline, which is no, don't wait. This is you. Define it up front. And I love the way Paul brought this out, which is declare your own personal values. You just start to think about that, because to the point here, this will be what sets out the culture. And then I thought this was a great point too. If you do find somebody doesn't fit, and we already had Jay from the audience tell us he had an example of that, don't leave the bad apple in the barrel, because the rest of them are going to rot around it. And the minute you do that, what are you doing? It's on this slide. You're being consistent, but you're not talking it, you're doing it, you're modeling it. You're showing you will actually hold people accountable to the culture. It's the most powerful thing you do.
If the team understands the values, then over time, if it's really healthy, if someone is doing something that's inconsistent with the values, people are going to chafe, right? And if your culture is really engaged. If your team's engaged with your culture, then teammates are going to pull that person aside and say, you know what, we don't really do that here. I mean, sometimes you can get great people that it takes them a while to assimilate into the culture, especially as you're scaling. And so I think it's important for managers and the peers and the culture needs to support this, to pull people aside and have a one-on-one and say, hey, look, you probably didn't mean it, but you made that person feel like shit, all right? And would have been a nicer way. Do you think there's a nicer way you could have said that? Sometimes people turn around because maybe they're coming from a culture in a company where people treat each other like crap, right? And that's not the way we do it at ABC Company. So, but if that doesn't work, cut off their oxygen. I mean,
So what's great is you can hear Mike, in full force here, as a CEO who is creating a culture. And you can tell that he's going to create respect for people because he wants to give them a chance, and he's going to try to encourage people to have a culture which says, well, we're going to give you a chance to get assimilated, to get, set up, to do your best. But hey, if you can't get it at that point, that's okay, you're out. And that's an example of a good culture because it's clear. Doesn't mean to say you agree with it, but it's clear. And it's obviously going to, create a consistency with the kind of people that you have.
There is one other thing on that. So it's extremely cliche, but the old adage of hiring slowly, firing fast. I've experienced so many times in my career that's how important that is. Because if you hire someone after a first interview, they can be on their best behavior. Second interview, they start to relax a little bit. If you have a meal with them, you go out with them, whatever. You can start to figure out what kind of person they are. But really to that point, if there is a cancer in your organization, the longer it takes you to cut it out, the more people get infected. So if you have gone through that process of hiring very slowly, then you've also got the right to fire fast.
Okay, thank you. That was a great analogy for something I would also quickly point out, which is I've never heard a manager say they fired somebody too fast. Never, literally. It's an amazing truth. And we go through, unfortunately, a lot of this in our business because companies change and organizations need to grow. And it's amazing how many times you go, God, I wish I'd done that a month ago. Or I wish I'd done that 3 months ago or a year ago. I've very rarely heard somebody go, I should never have fired that person.
Question. In terms of culture, we've discussed a lot about hiring and firing, kind of looking at it from the top down.
Yep.
What about whose money you're willing to accept in terms of financing? Could that ruin the culture? Could that affect the culture in terms of...
I probably resemble that remark, so I better be careful to let somebody else respond. What do you think about...
Good question.
Does the money you take impact your culture?
Investor money?
I think
go ahead, Paul.
I'd say very much so. Your investors are part of your team. You don't want to hire investors for money. You want to hire them for their ability to help the company. And if you're going to shortcut that process and hire an investor who has different values than you just have failed on the consistency test, the last bullet on this slide. So I think part of having a good culture is having incredible clarity across your team about your values. And if you short circuit that to get a better valuation or whatever, you're not being honest about your culture.
We just raised money and we defined our culture ahead of time. And we made sure we selected investors that we vetted out. Well, one I already knew because I worked with for years, right? So we already knew that. We knew he had the right kind of values. And the second one, I spoke with 2 CEOs who I've had a trusting relationship with who worked with that investor for years. But I couldn't envision changing our values based on bringing an investor in later.
Just one point on that. They can also impact you from a PR standpoint as well. We are with the candy company. Actually, Bill Gates invested into another fund, which invested into my last company, and it turned out that obviously Bill Gates' association with Monsanto and the fact that we were so heavily non-GMO, people tried to shoot us to pieces through the story and saying, well, how can you be non-GMO and take money from these sorts of people? So you have to be incredibly careful to make sure that their mission and vision and interests are closely aligned to your own.
So I didn't put it here, but it's in the workshop that we would have gone through tonight normally. I have a cultural quadrant, and you just asked one of the questions to it. To me, every one of these 4 stakeholders in your company needs to be part of your culture. Your customers, your employees, your partners, and your stakeholders. And the example I'd normally give is actually not a shareholder one, but you just had the answer to that, which is, do you think you should give your partners, for example, your supply chain partners, careful thought as to your culture? What's your answer? Now that you've heard the one about stakeholders, about shareholders.
Well, yeah, I would expect there to be some alignment there as well.
Can you say why?
Well, if there's partners who, don't have alignment, for example, if they're looking for different metrics, their main objective could be, business metrics, for example. It could be a misalignment for what you're trying to do with them.
Yeah. What do you think of this guy? No matter what you think of him, I think all of us probably know that Jeff Bezos symbolizes something at Amazon. Well, what's fascinating is how he decided from day one, to the question we were asking earlier, to make it unbelievably clear what Amazon's culture was. He took a door off its hinges and made it his desk. It's a pretty clear statement about what he wanted people to think about Amazon. Now, what do we know Amazon to be? Is it the highest cost place we go to look for things? Of course not. It's the lowest cost provider that we go to, assuming that because of the way his culture has permeated everything, we're going to get the best price. So literally, remember I said that's the metric view? Understand what your customers say about you? People think of Amazon as a low-cost place to go get things, not to mention that it's one-click simple and all that stuff. So he embodied that, and this is his way of doing it. So here's a question for you. I've kind of given you the answer, but let's talk about how it actually plays out, and I'll get Paul to walk through a few examples. Can culture have a physical manifestation? We've been talking about some very soft kind of stuff. I see you nodding at the front.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of it. The fact that you're building a company and you can't afford desks, or can you afford desks, but you choose not to because you want to send the right message.
Yeah, it's sending a message is the key point you make. Tell us the messages you were sending as you started to put some of these things in place.
It's funny, as I look at the words on these slides, they're so lame. I was riffing off some other example you gave me. I'm looking at the words right now, but these are some photos from Blade. And if any of you have visited, how many of you have been to Blade already? Anyone here? It's a very different space. Like, one of the most unique things about it is all the desks have wheels, because we've designed the space to run functions, either parties or seminars, and all the desks can disappear to a room we have in the back. We have a really sick DJ setup with also a sound platform, video DJ, lighting console. And then at night, when we throw these parties for entrepreneurs in Boston, very curated guest list for people who are creating tech companies, it basically turns into a club at night. So it's a little unique in a space that a lot of companies believe in having a good time and throwing parties every now and then. But as far as I know, Blade is the only place that the workplace is the party place, because all the desks disappear. So it's pretty visible when you come in to see us.
You have a couple more things.
I have a couple more. I'll do these quickly. This is a photo taken of a phone that was on my desk at Kayak, and I always said team first, customer second, but I was pretty maniacal about customer service. For example, we didn't hire any customer service people. I had the programmers do all the support. I think I did all the support for the first year, until I realized at one point, getting one of my programmers who was ignoring this one customer request that kept coming through me, getting him to actually answer customer's email would cause him to fix the bugs that the customer was reporting directly. At one point, the email wasn't enough, so I went out and found the loudest phone I could with a mechanical ringer and put it on my desk in the middle of an open office. The phone number for this phone was actually published on Kayak's website. I'm sure that I left Kayak just about 1 year ago. I bet they took this phone number off the website as soon as I left. But this phone would ring during the day, and it was really loud. And it was, it annoyed the programmers, and they would complain about it. I would say, when it rings really loud, it annoys you, it's a really simple thing to fix. These phones have two parts, not like the phone in your pocket. And if you pick up this top part, it stops ringing. And then if you put it up to your ear and you say, hello, there'll be someone on the other end of the line who knows something about your product that you don't know, and they're about to teach you something. So I was very focused on having all the programmers talking to the customers regularly, emailing them. And this was sort of a very physical and audible representation that customers are involved in everything we're doing every day. This next photo is a clicker that you would see a bouncer keep outside a club. This is on the main conference room at Kayak, and it's not that I literally sat there counting how many people were in each meeting, but it was a representation of that. And if I walked by our main conference room, which had glass wall, and I saw 10 people in the room, I'd pop my head in, and people would groan, Kayak employees, knowing what was about to happen. And I would say, "What are you guys talking about?" And they'd say, "Oh, this is the director of engineering from Expedia. We're designing a new XML interface for rent-a-cars." I'm like, "Really? And there's not 3 of you smart enough to do this? Like, you need 10 people in this room?" I was very, very focused on efficiency and pushing down decision-making as much as possible. And that was just a reminder of the team that I cared about this. This is Annabelle. I probably bought her at Amazon. One of the things about the Kayak culture was we were really into transparency for a number of reasons. It's efficient. It lets people operate with good data as opposed to things they're worried about. And we used to say that if there's an elephant in the room, you need to go into the Annabelle room and talk about it, to kind of get it off your chest. And it's all about just getting the truth out real quickly. I think that might be it for my photos, yeah.
I just love that. I don't know whether you guys agree. That's a great way to kind of bring culture to life. And what's fun about this is this stuff is not expensive or difficult to do. It's just thoughtful. You know, you can hear what Paul is literally bringing to life here are all the values that he talked to us earlier about. In fact, I want to tell you a little bit of a story here just so you can get a sense of culture really does link to execution. That's where we're going to go next, which is how do you do this? And the story is one which some of you might have all at least seen from one vantage point, and that is of 9/11. And it's about doing the right thing versus the easy or obvious thing. So whether you love or hate Enterprise Rent-A-Car, you're going to love this story. They've always had a focus on customer service. So when 9/11 happens, and stuff like this does happen, guess what? Nobody wanted to use the standard contract, which is, of course, a two-way rental contract. Because all they wanted to do was get out of Dodge. They just couldn't wait to get out of the city. So the poor customer representatives are absolutely overloaded with people trying to rent cars, except they have no idea where they're going to go and no idea when they're going to come back. They just want to get out of the city. What do? Your rule book says it's a two-way contract, but your culture says do the right thing. So guess what they did? They initiated one-way rentals. Now, there was no superior they could contact. There was absolutely no communication with HQ. There was no way that anybody told them that this was a rule that they could break without losing their job. But their culture was do the right thing by the customer. And so guess what? One-way rentals got written that day. And I'll tell you, every customer who went through that experience with Enterprise is a lifelong friend. That's when culture makes a difference. So what I talk about in this instance is think about how your culture can be a touchstone. We talked about empowerment. Think about how when there isn't an answer, when there isn't any direction, where it isn't obvious what the priority is, when you're on the phone with the customer and you've got to solve something, what could your culture do to empower your team to do the right thing? So I want to come to you guys. Adam, we haven't heard from you for a bit. You're trying to change the world in a lot of different ways. What will be some of the touchstones in your culture? What will be some of the things that you'll want your team to represent about Chew and about your products?
I had a previous company, and we were also trying to change the world through food. And we would be having team meetings, and in these team meetings, I'm all for having a pizza party if everyone's going to crash down at nighttime and do a lot of work. But it was the worst kinds of pizza. It was Domino's pizza. It was Coca-Cola's all over the tabletop. So if anyone from outside would come in, they would say that, yes, this particular company is talking about this particular mission, but they're not necessarily living it. So for me, it's about more than talking the talk. It's about walking the walk.
So it's a great example. You know, here you are, you're a health food company, you're trying to change the world by giving people better quality food, and you're eating Domino's pizza and Coca-Cola. That's the stuff that you can't back away from. It's so obvious. So, you know, living up to it in that way, as you obviously were trying to get people to do, is critical. Mike, just to start off with, you know, the blank sheet of paper you have at Silent.
So these are the values that we've defined, and at this point we actually now have 4 employees in the company, so 2 engineers started this week. So we sat down with the engineers and went over the values, and we actually in discussions with one of the engineers, we actually adapted one of these values, and I'll tell you which one in a moment. But the things that are important to us as we start the company, I've struggled with the title for the first one here. And so I think that may change a little bit, but the theme is that we want to create for our customers a feeling that they really love doing business with us. And the word loyalty, both my partner and I have struggled with. We've had a couple other words like delight, and we're not comfortable with that because it's not very hip. But loyalty is kind of like love. It's not something you really should, you can't ask for. But we want to create that kind of a sense with the customer. And so to do that, as a team, we're really passionate about customer needs, so they achieve their goals, and we want to be really easy to work with. And the last part of that, actually, we sat down. We're in the Start Tank incubator over at PayPal has this incubator. We got free rent for a year, which we're kind of excited about. And I think we broke the mold because we're the only guys over 30, I think, in the incubator. But anyway, the gal that actually runs the kitchen came up with this theme called "We Always Have Their Back." And we thought that was pretty cool. So that's in there. Play to win, right? So play to win, which means, let's set ambitious goals and let's achieve them. And we're going to make and meet commitments, take ownership, and focus on what's important. And all of these words mean something. And they'll provide guidance for our team down the road so that, focus on what's important. Well, what does that mean? Well, things change. And in the moment, something else might be more important. So let's use everybody's internal compass to determine, what's important in the moment. But we make and meet commitments. And that means to each other, and that means to customers, right? And if it means that we're in a situation where we can't meet a commitment, what do you think we do? We talk about it, maybe renegotiate, right? So anyway, I don't know if I should go through all these individually, but I'm just giving you a sense for the things that we've decided are important to us. And so at one point, I kind of pulled together the way I thought about the best way to put together a system to help my team succeed. And at the foundation, it's the bedrock, are two components. One is what we call leadership principles and then company values. Leadership principles, we've taken the time to actually define very simply 4 components that, to me, are important that I like to see leaders do, right? And so in my teams, I make sure our leaders kind of understand it deeply. And that way, the way we lead is pretty consistent. And the 4 things we look for is articulate vision, show you care, have substance. And what that does is, if leaders aren't doing those things, it's obvious to the rest of the team, right? And we're consistent with each other. So on top of that, you've got company values, and then you've got the other stuff, company strategy, your operating plan, which has budgets and goals and all that stuff. And then this, process and the whole theme around execution, refining execution to get to results. Now, principles guide how we lead, values guide how we act, and how we all make decisions, and the kind of behavior we want as a team, right? And none of this stuff works if the guy at the top doesn't, or woman, doesn't really follow it. And the first time you ever demonstrate that you're not really following those principles, the whole thing can come apart, right? The last thing I'd say is that I think is real important with values and building a culture is it's important to put in place, build it into everything you do. And so a big thing we did at OpenPages was we had award systems, or reward systems, that rewarded people for doing great things consistent with OpenPages values. And one of the systems, they got actual equity for it. And the whole way it worked was team members could nominate people for doing great things, and there was a team of other employees that approved it, and employees get equity. Another one was an on-the-spot award where another teammate could nominate somebody else for doing something great that was consistent with the values. And pretty much everybody got it. And the physical benefit, they'd get a debit card and they'd get rewarded, recognized in front of the whole company and, pretty much every monthly or quarterly meeting. But they'd also get a sticker for their computer, which was kind of cool. So I don't know if you've ever seen like Ohio State or these football, they get stickers all over there. Of course, now stickers you see all over everybody's computer, it seems. But back then, you didn't see that as much. So anyway, so it'd be kind of neat. You'd be in meetings and you'd see somebody who had, it was neat to me anyway. You'd see somebody who had like 10 stickers on their computer. That means they're like really doing it, Anyway.
So thank you for sharing that, Mike. I'm hopeful that some of you will spend some time to talk to Mike about this because he's got a lot of depth behind it. But what you're hearing is somebody who really thought through a consistent framework for building a basis for his company to act consistently. From the bottom of the value chain, literally as he was sort of defining how he wanted to lead the business, all the way up to how he'd measure results. And that's the stuff that makes a difference. And by the way, he left out one word here, which I'll just fill in for him very quickly, but it's communication, which I've heard him talk many times. He's such a thoughtful thinker and goes through explaining things to people that everybody is absolutely clear in his company what he means and is intent on doing, obviously, therefore, their best to be part of that. So communication is a huge part of this. It's something we talk about in the workshop if you watch it online as being the lifeblood of your business. The other thing he brought out, which I don't want to lose, is rewards are an incredibly important part of your culture. We talked about how you might, for example, challenge somebody if they're not doing their job or at the extreme fire them. But the other much more fun part to do is the rewards piece. How do you actually reward good behavior, things that are reinforcing your culture, that are reinforcing your values? That makes a huge difference. Peer rewards that are broadly visible, things like that can make a huge difference. So I'm going to just pause here before I introduce Adam and say one thing. You can tell this is a very big subject. That's why we decided to make a workshop tonight, and we haven't covered a lot of the things. But what I do want to make sure you get a sense of in this next piece is, how do you make this into a piece of your execution? How do you actually build this into the fabric of what you do day to day? So Adam, come tell us a little bit about Chew and how you've made this a part of your day-to-day operating principles, your culture.
So I'll start with a little story first. So I'm a chef of 18 years. I've had restaurants in 5 different countries. One thing is the culture of a kitchen, and another one is the culture of a successful company. The culture of a kitchen, I always said to people, the reason why I would never have an open kitchen is because there's a reason why the door should close, is because what generally happens behind that door, nobody wants to hear. So one is, in order to run a successful kitchen, it's the furthest thing from a democracy. If everybody starts to weigh in their opinion and this and that, when you're under the very, 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 under the intensity of a service, you set yourself up every day. You work 16, 18 hours every day. You set yourself up to get slammed for a period of time, and then you come back the following day and you do it again. You do it 6 or 7 days a week. So that's more of like that's a dictatorship way of running a business. Then I had to make the very interesting transition from a dictatorship to a democracy, and a democracy is obviously a company. And when I first, it ended in tears in the beginning, because trying to run a company where there's obviously free speech and where people are allowed to have an opinion and not get burned was an interesting transition. So that was one which took a lot of. I had to work at that personally myself a lot, and I still do every single day. The chef mentality keeps slipping back, but. Now we come to something which in the previous company, in Unreal, the thing that really struck me was it was the power of a for-profit company on a social mission, right? So you've got to also run these particular companies in a certain way, because there is a particular set of expectations of how you do business. Right? You can't be the dictator in a company where you're trying to change the world, right? You can't be seen screaming at people if you're trying to change the world. Making people's lives better, but then making another set of people's lives difficult in the process doesn't work. So Unreal was really the seed that got planted, which was a for-profit company on a social mission. Literally every door in the world would open. We would meet with world leaders, CEOs of some of the biggest banks in the world, movie stars, people from music, and everyone wanted to talk about this because it was something which we were changing, hopefully changing the world, but changing the world through something tangible which people can put in their mouth, and it's not, we're not selling them a sob story, we're selling them something delicious, right? So the next company, which is a company called Chew, if you just go back to that one for 1 second. So for me, the mission statement of the company for Chew had to be something that was moved people emotionally, right? We want to change the way the world thinks about snacking. We will do this by reimagining the food everyone loves the most, right? So for me, the most important point there is that people love their junk food, right? They love their snack food. We're trying to change something that no one knows needs changing, because you'll never come across a person who says, I don't like my Snickers bar, change my potato chips. Nobody's going to say that, because they're delicious, and they're delicious for a reason, because there are a lot of intelligent people out there who are getting paid very good money to make these things. Almost the forbidden word in the food industry is addictive, right? There is this certain thing called a bliss point, and the bliss point is the maximum sugar, salt, and fat to make it, once again, very controversial, but make it addictive, make people digest much faster, make them peak, their energy and their blood sugar levels peak as fast as possible and crash relatively fast afterwards. So on the way down, when you're crashing, you're grabbing for really whatever you can grab, right? You're grabbing for the next Snickers bar, potato chips, whatever it might be. So therefore, it's good for business. So what we said, we want to change the way the world thinks. That was a very important point. Something we're trying to change is a mentality, right? Everyone believes that in order to do good for yourself, good for your body, there are a certain set of sacrifices, right? You want to eat a Snickers bar today, but you're going to do the right thing and you're going to grab for a granola bar because you're doing the quote-unquote right thing. But if you have a look on the back of a granola bar, there's probably just as much sugar as a candy bar. And I guarantee every mouthful you're having of that granola bar, you're wishing you had candy in your mouth. And chances are you're going to go and cheat on yourself anyway and go and grab that candy bar. So now you're doubling down, right? So we're trying to change the way people think about the junk food or the snack food or the on-the-go world, and trying to retrain people to believe that effectively you can have your cake and eat it too. Let's go to the next one. So, I mean, this is just a couple of examples of things that I've done. This one here, we were trying to reinvent the way that people eat on-the-go breakfast. So obviously yogurt is something that's eaten really very frequently. So we said, how can you create something that gave you that same satisfaction of a yogurt, but with no dairy, full of chia seeds, protein, omegas, and things like that. This one here is a little project I did in Spain. I had IKEA came to me and said they were having trouble getting the Spanish people to eat Swedish food. And my first question was, I didn't even know that IKEA had food. I later learned that IKEA has a food business. I think it's 1.5 billion euros a year. So it's a decent size. So this is a little concept of mine, which is everything that I do, I always give the foreign with the familiar. Right? If you give someone a foreign technique and a foreign flavor, they've got no basis to say, I like it because it's similar to anything like that, right? It's just foreign. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the taste is. But if we gave them, so we converted, obviously the most classic food item in Spain is tapas, and utilizing Swedish ingredients and putting them inside of these tapas. Okay, so something, I'm not going to read this word for word, but a notion now within this particular company, within Chew, a notion that we live by every day is I go in, we partner with some of the largest food and beverage companies in the world, and we help make their food better tasting, more innovative, better for you, better for the environment, right? So I often, a very, very common thing is they laugh at me and they say, you know, Adam, what can you do that our 2,000 or 3,000 food scientists can't do? And I tell them very simply is that we fail very quickly. And they said, well, do you see one of your success metrics as failing? And I say, yeah, I do. Because if call it within a 3-month period, if we've failed, I say 50 times, it's way more than 50 times. There's one product we started 4 weeks ago, and we're up to like version 133 today. If we have failed 133 times, we don't just stumble into the next test, right? We look at What did that test tell us? What did that failure tell us? And then we pivot and we adjust and we do another test. And if that one didn't work, we do it again and we do it again and we do it again. So in a 3-month period where larger companies haven't even stopped their speculation, right? We're already 50 to now 133 steps closer to finding success, right? So we have created a culture where it's okay if 98% of everything you do goes into the trash, or if, obviously you're gonna take a bite yourself, but the rest is gonna go into the trash, that's okay. That's the cost of that 2%. And that 2% is worthwhile because it took you that 98%. And you know that other people are way behind because you know that it took you 98% of failure to get to that 2% success. And something I always tell people as well is that if you're succeeding very quickly, it either means that you are not pushing hard enough or your standards are too low, right? Everybody coming into the company loves to try to say that they've hit it out of the gate. Right? Here's a test, I want to achieve this particular result. They come to me and they say, look, we've got that result. And you taste it, you say to them, listen, there's 2 ways to look at this, right? You can look at it and you can try to find all of the positives, or you can look at it and try and find all the negatives, because you can't fix positives, you can fix negatives, right? So we have a culture where it sounds very pessimistic and it sounds like a terrible place to be, but we have a culture where we look for opportunities, and we always believe that there is no such thing as a finished project, that everything is a work in progress. And even once it's gone to market, this is the anti-company and the anti-marketing model, but even when it's in the marketplace, I want to create a company where we constantly keep iterating on those things that people believe to be finished, but each and every time when we find a new technique or a new way, that we go back to those products and we renovate those products and we make them better.
So what I love about this is you're hearing from 3 completely different viewpoints. You know, you've got a chef who's building a food company. You've got an enterprise CEO who's building products and services for the largest companies in the world. And you've got a founder who's helping get consumer products from 0 to scale that we all use. Yet they're all similar principles. So I just want to use a couple of examples here to go through these. So first of all, if you think about the guiding principles we've been going through, you can hear people are asking these questions like, how do they judge themselves? Is it by results or effort? How do they solve problems? How do they handle mistakes? What are the decisions made? And who are they made by? What is management in this? Is it, leadership by example, or is it something that's just, very constraining? How does the, customer get prioritized over the team? These are all questions that I encourage you to go through to establish your values. And they're all on the website, by the way, just so you know. They're all part of the prior workshop. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter what product you're producing. There is a checklist. And when you want to take it through to execution, it involves all the things we've been talking about: leadership, communication. How do you establish responsibility and accountability? How do you celebrate success and rewards? What is it that you want to recognize? And I'm sure you can think of many others. The point is to make it authentic to you. I also can guarantee that communication is going to be a key enabler of this. If your communication isn't good up and down the company, and there isn't a basis for people to understand what you're suggesting and indeed to be part of it and contribute to it, my guess is your culture will break too. And then we talked about this briefly. Recognition and rewards are incredibly important. What does it reinforce? If your rewards reinforce your culture, obviously that helps. And there are difficult things that happen, such as we discussed briefly this evening, like what happens when somebody's not performing? How do you deal with them? What are the challenges when people are not actually upholding your values? How do you deal with that? And then we talked about this too. Is this something you do later on, or is it something you do early? And I think you've resoundingly heard, do it early, make it authentic, be thoughtful about it, so it really can endure. And don't pay lip service. This is not about what you put on the wall. It's about what you walk, and indeed, it's defined by you. So as the founder, you actually have a responsibility early on to set the culture. And it's not something you can abdicate. You just can't do that. Culture comes from the top in every company, whether it's small or large, and you hear that resoundingly all over the place. The good news is if you do it right, you will end up with something that's truly differentiated. I love this quote, because whether you like Southwest or not, they've done amazing things, and Herb, as the co-founder, said it just perfectly, which is, you could copy all the things in the playbook for Southwest, but you can't copy their culture. And it's one of the reasons why they were so successful at a time when the airline industry was going through tremendous upheaval. So I hope what you've taken away from tonight is that if you do this right, this is a substantive piece, whether you call it foundational or otherwise, of what establishes a basis for you to build an enduring company. So thank you very much for all your time and attention. Thank you particularly to Paul and to Mike and to Adam for sharing all their great insights tonight. I encourage you to come spend time with them. And for those of you who didn't get to see, obviously, the workshop that goes with this before, it's on the website. And next time, next semester, we'll talk about how this relates to hiring and doing that as well. So thank you very much tonight. And again, thank you guys very much indeed.